We have seen a growth in populism and populist parties in Europe over the past several years. Have you seen a similar trend in Latvia? And if so, what are the causes?
Of course, it would be strange if Latvia is immune from this curse. Because we also face this problem, like virtually all other European states. The causes, because academics are writing the whole books about it. Somehow it's paradoxical that people in Europe and actually elsewhere live much better than any moment in history before. But apparently, they are less satisfied with this life than at any historical moment before. So people expect much more. It's not enough for them to have peace, to have food, and to have dwelling. And what is the most troubling moment is that growing number of people do not believe that they can obtain more within these democratic systems. They're looking for some other shortcuts, and they're talking about the growing gap between the political class, elites, or system, as they say, and common people. Why it happens, it's really difficult to say. It's one reason is obvious. This is emergence of social networks and new media, as we call it. Because earlier still serious media was accountable for what they publish. And there was some filtering of counterproductive ideas, of extremist ideas. Now it's not the case anymore. So now everybody can publish his or her views, and not always can be accountable for this. And of course, the problem of accountability of service providers is a front line of human rights now. Whether the freedom of expression should be limited in this way, and whether service providers must be accountable for this. There are apparently different approaches in Europe and in America. And just recently we had several important landmark cases in the European Court of Human Rights. Delphi versus Estonia was the first of them. But actually, apparently, technological development also plays an important role in this emergence of populism.
One of the main topics at this forum has been the ongoing migrants crisis in Europe, and how it has led to a rise in support for populist far-right parties. And what is your opinion of the EU's response, such as a quota system and the EU-Turkey deal?
Right-wing parties and right-wing populists always try to capitalize on the fear of otherness, and always point to some people with different skin color, which belong to different religious confessions or speak different languages. But as to EU response, in my view, it was rather weak. It's apparently that the asylum system, which was developed under the World War II, cannot sustain the current numbers of refugees and asylum seekers. It must be transformed, but I believe that it's absolutely indispensable that this humanist principle must be preserved and retained, that the right to asylum is one of the greatest achievements of the development of this universal human rights system. Procedures could be changed, some methods could be different, but we must stick to this basic achievement of the human rights system after the World War II.
Migrants system is out of control in Europe, or not?
No, it is controlled to a lesser or bigger extent, but it is controlled nationally, and this is a problem. So, because Europe is united now, we have Schengen system, there are no borders, but still formally only member states are in charge for asylum procedures, are in charge for residence permits and so on. So, and we see here a clear inconsistency between these national procedures and international nature of migration and asylum. So what we need here, not less Europe, but more Europe. We must internationalize procedure. We must approve procedures and mechanisms at the EU level. Unfortunately, several EU member states resist to this because they don't want to take up their share of the burden. And this is the main problem, because really I believe that probably EU is too big. So we need this Europe of different speeds, and those states who are really ready to develop this European cooperation further and are ready for higher degree of integration must not be stopped by those member states who maybe joined the EU by mistake.
In Ukraine we have a refugee migrant problem also. Millions of Ukrainians have left the country to Poland, to Canada, and even to Latvia. The causes of this include both war and poverty. How can the EU respond to this? How is Latvia dealing with its own immigration problem?
Immigration is first of all a problem of states from which people emigrate. It's sorry to say, but this is, unlike the previous issue we discussed, is not an EU problem. Of course, the main cause of immigration is inequality. And yes, we know this quite well. Latvia lost more than 20% of its population, and this process is continuing. And we understand this very well, that as long as for the same work, workers will be paid for 50% less, with much weaker system of social protection, with lower pensions and with lower welfare, the process will continue. Migration is inevitable. So what we are trying to do is to make Latvia more attractive. Of course, under no circumstances we would like to come back to this Soviet situation of Iron Curtain. Freedom of movement is one of the greatest achievements for democracy. But of course, this is not in our interests, so we must develop social protection system, we must make better education, we must make Latvia a better place to live. It's not that easy, but we have access to European funds, and these programs for catching up and for achieving better equality, this is the stated goal of the EU programs and the EU funds. So and it's up to us, just like up to other member states, to make use of this money in the most effective way. Of course, it's not going to happen overnight, and these processes are not one-sided. According to different assessments, up to 1/3 of those Latvian emigres who left for the European Union return, sooner or later, or plan to return. So my universal response to make Latvia a better place to live. So this is what we are struggling with.
What do you think about Ukrainian future? Is it possible to be NATO membership, EU membership?
It's up to you. It's completely up to you. So Ukraine receives a lot of international support, a lot of good advice. Here in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, we discuss the situation in Ukraine quite often. Different bodies of the Council of Europe, including the Venice Commission, is permanently preoccupied with Ukraine. But we cannot do some important things for you. We can advise you, we can help you, but you must do your job yourself.
Latvia and Ukraine are similar in that when our countries became independent from the Soviet Union, we inherited a large Russian community, which we had to bring into a new political and national culture. Latvia seems to have been much more successful in this way. How did Latvia involve the Russian minority in the civic and political life of the country, while at the same time combating potential aggression from Russia?
Frankly, I feel a bit uncomfortable with the way how you asked this question. I don't think that people can be considered as a burden, as just an object with whom state must do something. No, I believe that ethnic origin is not crucial, and mother tongue is not crucial for political loyalty. Much depends on how inclusive the society is and how we manage to accommodate diversity. This is the same problem all European countries struggle. Maybe the cultural, linguistic, ethnic diversity emerged in a somewhat different way, but the problem is the same. So, and the answer is common. Inclusive society, unity in diversity, society of equal opportunities, when attitude of the state towards everybody does not depend on his place of birth, gender, mother tongue, or ethnicity. This is not that easy, of course, and I'm not sure that Latvia could be mentioned as a good example. We have a lot of problems, we made a lot of mistakes. One important thing, the most important achievement, that Latvia still remains one of the very few European states which has never witnessed ethnically based violence. So we can be dissatisfied, we can quarrel, we can disagree, but we don't fight. And this is really a great achievement. Although I believe that in Ukraine the situation is somewhat similar, because I strongly disagree with those who say that, for example, in Donbass we witness ethnic conflict. No, it's an aggression of one state. And I know that many Russian speakers of Ukraine, they are fighting and dying for territorial integrity of Ukraine and Donbass. So it would be unjust to discard and disregard their ethnic identity and their cultural needs, because Russian language is not privatized by Mr. Putin.
What do you think about the situation which happened in Crimea and eastern Ukraine? How long this conflict still exists?
Of course, it depends on the internal developments in Russia. I have no illusions. The situation is really very difficult, but I remember very well that when we discussed this in the Latvian People's Front in the late 80s, 88, 89, so we discussed, is it possible that Latvia will become an independent state? And all foreign experts told us, you must be patient, you must wait, maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years. It happened, everything happened in 1 year, so you never know. And the situation is extremely difficult, but we will see that for Russia, maintaining these policies is extremely expensive. Soviet Union did not lose in warfare. Soviet Union lost economic competition, although it was a very rich country with a lot of natural resources, with a lot of hard-working people, and still the Soviet Union could not sustain this economic development. And I am afraid that Russia now is in quite difficult position, so I very much hope that people in Russia will change something, because it's self-defeating for them, these current policies. But of course, I will be very cautious to make any forecast and to mention any dates.
Maybe Europe needs Russia more than needs Ukraine.
Europe needs all countries in Europe, but needs democratic countries. And apparently you are aware of the current situation with the Russian membership in the Council of Europe. Our Russian colleagues do not participate in the work of the Parliamentary Assembly, and, but the position of the Assembly is very clear. This is not just a company of bodies. This is a club with certain rules for membership. And if a country does not respect some basics of democracy and human rights, it cannot be a member of this club. So, of course, this factor of realpolitik is also very important, but after the World War II, we received somewhat different world order. So we have universal system of human rights. We have certain rules of behavior. Unfortunately, these rules are not always observed, but still there is a broad consensus that the rules are there and they must be respected. And sometimes international community can make in a very concerted and coordinated way. So yes, now I can tell you the same what we heard from our European and American friends. You must be patient and you must stick to your ideals. You must stick to democracy and human rights yourself.
Have you not considered the possibilities that some EU countries are ready to walk away from sanctions because European business and American business are taking a hit from continuing these sanctions?
You know, it's the matter is that European sanctions are very different from Russian sanctions, because European sanctions are targeted. These are sanctions against those enterprises and individuals who directly and personally participated in aggression, who directly and personally violated international law. Russian sanctions are actually a landslide. So you imposed your sanctions, so we will not buy your pork. But whatever, as if European Polish pigs are guilty in some violations or something like this. So yes, it's difficult, but democracy and human rights have their own cost. And I don't think that losses for Europe will be enormous. Latvia is hit by the sanctions probably more painfully. The sanctions are more painful for us, for our farmers in particular, than for, let's say, Portuguese farmers and so on. And yes, we lost big markets in Russia, we lost money, but I don't think that Latvian politicians and Latvian political class is prepared to discuss abolition of sanctions without any changes on the Russian side. So I very much hope that our Russian colleagues will receive this message and will understand that they must make certain steps. Yeah. This is a dialogue, this is a painful process, but it must begin. So far, this dialogue is simply non-existent.
Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union says the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minority. So does the European Union still care about these fundamental principles?
No, since it's written in the basic treaty, it must care. But of course, it's very complicated. The European Union is now at the third stage of its development. When it was established first after the World War II in the form of the Union of Coal and Steel, the main idea was peace. To make the next war between France and Germany impossible, and to merge the steel and coal industries was considered the main prerequisite for lasting peace. Then the European Union evolved into economic union, and then this common market idea to ensure these famous four freedoms. Free movement of goods, services, capitals, and people. This was implemented. And after the free market idea was implemented, the European Union aspired to become something more, a union based on values. Then the idea of the Constitution appeared, then this Charter of Fundamental Rights appeared, and then big enlargement happened. And after that, it appeared that there is no consensus about human rights and freedoms and liberties and so on. So now the European Union struggles with its own capacities to meet its own aspirations. So it's very important that this declaration is there, but so far it's just declaration, except for some important areas, like, for example, equality and non-discrimination. Somehow paradoxical, but non-discrimination directives of the European Union are much stronger and much more effective than corresponding instruments of the Council of Europe, what supposedly must be a body specializing in human rights. But it's very important that European Union strongly cooperates with the OSCE in the field of security and with the Council of Europe in the field of democracy and human rights, and does not try to develop another set of human rights standards. I believe it would be disastrous if we have two systems of human rights, let's say human rights for the poor in the Council of Europe and human rights for the rich in the European Union. So I am quite optimistic. I believe that European Union must change, and European Union has a potential to change, but of course there is a long way to go.
Does Latvia afraid the Russian aggression?
It's really difficult. Yes, this historical experience, of course, is a sort of very difficult trauma. Strategists say that, all experts on security say that military aggression, direct military aggression, is little probable because of many reasons. But anyway, hybrid war is going on. And in the meantime, we still have some economic relations. So Russia, despite sanctions, despite everything, remains an important economic partner with regard to transit in particular. And Russia is interested in this cooperation, in particular in this transit and many other things. We believe in people's diplomacy. We try to increase the number of Russian tourists in Latvia, which dropped substantially after Crimea. Now it's growing. So it's important that Russian people come to Latvia and to see how people live here, that it's not a fascist state, and so on. So, but of course, this is this is a very important factor for us. But Latvia is a NATO member state with Article 5. Latvia is an EU member state, so we are not alone. Although, of course, some people in Latvia recall historical experience when in 1940s these international guarantees didn't work, but then we were not members of NATO. So, yes, it's a pity that we have to spend too much money for defense, because we have a lot of social problems, education, healthcare, and so on, where we could spend this money with much better purpose. But yes, we have to meet these requirements of NATO. So we hope that common sense will prevail.
What is the situation with Russian propaganda in your country? Because Russia brazenly uses media to spread the lies. What about the situation in your country?
It's, I'm old enough, and I very well remember Soviet system of jamming foreign enemy propaganda and how we tried to listen to Radio Freedom, to BBC through this jamming, through this noise. Nowadays it's impossible. It's impossible legally because we have this Council of Europe Convention on Transfrontier Television, we have the European Union Audiovisual Directive, and it's impossible also technically because we have different platforms. So most of satellite service providers and internet service providers are simply not within our jurisdiction. So the only way how we can oppose this hostile propaganda is to offer alternative. And from this point of view, we made some serious mistakes, in my view. So in the early 90s, Latvia drastically reduced the number of content on TV and radio produced in Latvia in the Russian language. And it was supposed that the Russian speakers will switch to the Latvian broadcasting as soon as broadcasting in the Russian language is eliminated. Of course, it didn't happen. And of course, its mother tongue is very important for everybody. regardless of political views, regardless of political loyalty, and here we come back to this problem of accommodation of diversity. Now, after all these sad events and after this hybrid war started, we are trying to recreate some local broadcasting in Russian. We try to make available some other programs like BBC in Russian and some other broadcasts, but it's one of the main problems with TV, you know this better than me, is that it's very easy to lose audience. It's very difficult to reconquer audience, to regain audience. So this is why, yes, it is a problem. Frankly speaking, I believe the diversity of views in the media is good. It's good if you have media in different languages which offer different ideas. Of course, there are always red lines. Extremism, clear propaganda, clear populism must be filtered out. And this is the responsibility of service providers. We mentioned this already. But it's very important to develop what we call media literacy, digital literacy, this ability to evaluate independently, to make independent conclusions. It's free thinking, independent thinking. And but it is impossible to come back to the Soviet model, when people receive only those information which the government's belief is good and possible. We must rely on our people, we must trust our people, we have no other choice. Although, yes, it is difficult, but we must be creative enough and we must be open-minded enough.